I'm always requested, well, almost always requested to do that second reading from Paul's letter to the Corinthians for weddings. People love that reading because it talks about love. So about 2 weeks ago, I was reading online of a priest who does marriage prep, and he uses that reading with the fiancés who are there in front of him. He has them substitute their fiancé's name wherever it says love. I thought, interesting. So it would sound something like this. Anne is patient and kind. She is not jealous. She is not pompous. Chris is not inflated. He's not rude. He doesn't seek his own self-interest. Kay is not quick-tempered. She doesn't brood over injury, doesn't rejoice over wrongdoing. Matt rejoices with the truth. He bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. Wow, that's kind of cool. The priest would say, if those qualities fit with what you see in front of you, that person you see in front of you, you've found the right person for your life. I wonder how many couples run into a roadblock at that moment, and how many marriages suddenly don't happen because of that counseling. I hope not many. Because I hope when we find that right person, we find the qualities of love that Paul speaks about in Corinthians. But Paul was not speaking about marriage when he wrote that. In fact, Paul didn't believe people should get married. Paul was convinced that Christ was coming back immediately, and marriage would just distract us from the important work at hand of getting ready for the coming of Jesus Christ. So don't get married was his advice. So when he wrote these words, he was not writing it for engaged couples or married couples. He was writing it for every single Christian person. That every single Christian should have these qualities of love, the most wonderful of all spiritual gifts. So hear it in a different way. I'm going to ask you some questions. You don't have to say it out loud, but this is kind of how we should be looking at it as Christians. Am I patient? Am I kind? Do I get jealous or pompous or rude? Do I seek my own self-interest? Am I quick-tempered? Do I brood over injury and rejoice over wrongdoing? Or do I rejoice with the truth? Do I bear all things, believe all things, hope all things, endure all things? That's the question of the Christian. Do these qualities of love show up in my own life, and do I live them? And I think that brings it home for me. But, second one here, but we have to be able to say those things in good times and in bad times, because being a Christian isn't all rainbows and unicorns. Being a Christian sometimes can be very difficult, as we found in today's gospel. Remember, at the beginning of the gospel, they were praising him. They thought he was wonderful. Jesus was the center of attention. But by the end of the gospel, he was at the edge of a cliff. They were going to throw him head first to his death. Being a Christian sometimes means that we are going to be the center of attention for praise, and sometimes not so much. Rejection. Sometimes we're going to get a pat on the back. Sometimes we're going to get a push off the cliff because we love. But what Christ calls us, and what Paul is affirming here, is that no matter what it is, the pat on the back or the push off the cliff, we continue to love unconditionally. And we do so with a heart that is generous and open, especially during this year of mercy that Pope Francis has called us to. Pope Francis has called us to this moment of mercy, and I think Luke's gospel especially helps us to find out what that means, to discover its meaning, to be merciful no matter whether we are embraced or rejected. So here's what I think it means to live those words from Paul's letter to the Corinthians. We're called to embrace forgiveness. We're called to protect all life, innocent and guilty. We're called to stand against violence done against us, but also done in our name. We're called to be merciful to those who may not desire it from us, or deserve it. We're called to heal the wounds of our families and our communities. We're called to work for reconciliation in this world. As Pope Francis said, we are called to practice the corporal and spiritual works of mercy, to feed the hungry, give water to the thirsty, clothe the naked, house the homeless, visit the sick and imprisoned, bury the dead. We're called to address those places in people's lives where they feel helpless and hopeless. We're called to live out those corporal and spiritual works of mercy every day. And we're called to live out the words of St. Paul's letter to the Corinthians, to love, no matter where it leads. We're called to be the love that the world longs for. Remembering, as Paul said, that love never fails. You don't have to be married to practice those qualities. You just have to be open-hearted. You have to be willing to reach out, whether you get that pat on the back or the push off the cliff. That's what it means to be a follower of Christ. So during this year of mercy, God bless. And go church.